First of all, I'd like to ask you, what do you think about this latest escalation in the Kerch Strait, and what are the Russian goals?
I think it's a very serious escalation. It is taking the war in eastern Ukraine from just land now into the maritime domain. And I think Russia's goals here are pretty severe. I think Russia hopes to gain complete dominance of the Sea of Azov, complete control over the Kerch Strait. And as a result, I think they want to economically starve or suffocate Ukraine, especially eastern Ukraine, and especially the ports of Berdyansk and Mariupol. So I think the goal here is to apply economic warfare to Ukraine in advance of the presidential election to try to convince Ukrainians that the war is hopeless, that Russia is stronger militarily, and that there will be economic consequences for Ukraine's continued desire to join Western institutions.
Continuing with this, in this line, what do you think Ukraine's reaction should be? Because it is important, it's very hard to decide how to react in this situation. And what do you think about the reaction so far?
Well, I think the reaction so far has been good. I think the fact that Ukraine did not fire back on the Russian ship, was not an armed skirmish in the Black Sea, is actually a good thing, because it shows that Ukraine was calm and cool and that the Russian side was 100% responsible for the aggression. However, going forward, it is difficult for Ukraine to come up with a strategy, because in the maritime domain, Ukraine has a huge weakness and disadvantage as compared with Russia. And so going forward, I think what Ukraine needs to do better is explain the situation, especially with regards to the imposition of martial law, where I think the authorities have been a little bit slow to explain to their own public, but also to the international community, why they have adopted this martial law resolution. And then I think Ukraine needs to also work very hard with its partners to seek greater support, more pressure on Russia in the form of sanctions, and more military assistance.
Yeah, talking about the international reaction, actually, we've seen a lot of declarations, but there were very little concrete offers providing help for Ukraine. So what can Ukraine count on? What Ukraine should insist on from the international community? What can it really count on something?
Well, I'm afraid that this is exactly why Putin has escalated at this particular time. Because if Putin sees that the international community issues statements and does nothing beyond that, he will escalate this even more, because he then will understand that he's able to get away with this sort of aggression. And so what I would hope to see from Ukraine is much more intensive diplomacy by President Poroshenko, Prime Minister Groysman, and other Ukrainian leaders to reach out to their Western counterparts, especially the President of France, the President of the United States, the Chancellor of Germany, but also others, and encourage them to follow up this action with sanctions and to provide greater military assistance. That's what's needed right now, and it has to be a very intense full-court press, as we say.
Yeah, you mentioned military assistance. What form of assistance can it be, realistically?
Well, what I would recommend is that Ukraine concentrate especially on maritime capabilities. And the most important, to my mind, are anti-ship missiles that would be ground-based, as well as radar and intelligence and surveillance systems to go along with those radars. I think the task of rebuilding the Ukrainian Navy will take years and will cost millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions potentially of dollars. And so that's not something that can be accomplished in the next few months. But radars and missiles are something that can be provided relatively quickly.
On the other hand, you also mentioned that Russia tries to suffocate Ukraine economically. How can these economic losses be compensated?
Well, here again, Ukraine needs to rely on its Western partners to impose costs on Russia, because the costs have to be there, and then ideally greater assistance to Ukraine. It is certainly the case that Russia will continue to try to harass maritime traffic from the ports of Berdyansk and Mariupol, but Ukraine needs to insist that that traffic be allowed to proceed to international markets without harassment and without delay. But in the meantime, There needs to be greater pressure on Russia, and Ukraine also needs to talk to its European Union partners about some sort of arrangement to help boost trade with the West.
In the aftermath of this incident, there was the G20 summit in Buenos Aires this weekend. We've seen that President Trump has cancelled his meeting with President Putin and quoting actually the situation with Ukrainian ships. What do you think are there other results, let's say? What other U.S. reaction can we expect apart from cancelling this summit? What other pressure can the U.S. apply on Russia in this case?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint your viewers, but unfortunately, I don't believe President Trump canceled the meeting over Ukraine. I think he canceled the meeting likely because of domestic political developments. There was a huge story here involving Trump's business dealings with the Kremlin during the presidential campaign. And that news broke just as Trump was about to leave for Argentina. And that's the real reason, unfortunately, why I think he canceled the meeting. But
although officially he was saying it was because of Ukraine.
Officially because of Ukraine, but I think your viewers need to understand that that was the official reason and probably not the real reason. Now, as far as pressure, the U.S. has enormous pressure that it can bring to bear on Russia. If the U.S. were to apply full asset freezes on major Russian banks, the impact on Russia's economy would be devastating and it would be immediate. So far, the United States has not done that at all. And so I would suggest that that be one of the options on the table going forward. But it's an open question whether the Trump administration has any appetite for pursuing that kind of bold action.
And my last question would be about the unity, transatlantic unity, or the lack of it, because when the first sanctions against Russia were introduced after the annexation of Crimea, there was some similarity of the transatlantic unity. In the recent years, there were more and more rifts between the EU and the US, within the NATO. So the situation now seems quite precarious for Ukraine. What's your prognosis? Can we still expect this transatlantic unity to somehow counter Russia? Or are these hopes futile?
Well, I think that the situation is precarious. I think there are countries, especially within the EU, that would like for sanctions to go away. But I would disagree with you that the unity was there right after Crimea. It wasn't there then either. And don't forget, it was the shooting down of M18 and the killing of 298 innocent civilians that really galvanized the EU to act to impose sanctions. And then with regards to the UK, it was really the assassinate or attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal on the territory of the UK that galvanized London to take a much tougher attitude towards Moscow. So unfortunately, we have a pattern here whereby Western European governments only get tough with Russia when they see an immediate impact in terms of their citizens and their equities. And so I'm not optimistic that the unity will hold. I hope the current sanctions can be renewed, and I think that's likely. In terms of more sanctions, it's going to be a very difficult struggle.